What's a rule that was implemented somewhere that massively backfired? Also, the infamous Barbados vs Grenada soccer match point. The organizers of the 1994 Caribbean Tournament Cup had a rather odd change to the rules for extra time. If a game was still drawn at full time, it would go to extra time, but the first goal scored would win. This is perfectly normal, the golden goal rule. What was different is that they ruled that winning this way would count as having won by 2 goals for the purpose of tournament qualification, instead of just 1. Barbados went into a match against Grenada needing 2 goals to qualify for the main tournament. If they lost or won by only 1 goal, Grenada would qualify instead. Under the regular rule, this would mean that if the match went to extra time, there would basically be no point Barbados playing, because even if they scored, they would only win by 1 goal and not qualify. But the 2-point rule would motivate them to play on. Sound good? Well, you might be able to guess what happened. The match looked like it was about to end with Barbados 2-1 Grenada, a win for Barbados, but not the 2 goals they needed. So Barbados deliberately scored an own goal in the last few minutes of the match, making the score 2-2, hoping to trigger extra time and a chance to score the magic 2 value goal point. The Grenada players quickly realized they could do the same, score an own goal to make the match 3-2 to Barbados, which would have Barbados winning by only 1 goal. So Grenada would qualify point, but the Barbados players realized that too, and so they began to defend Grenada's goal. So for the last 7 minutes of the match, Grenada were trying to score a goal in either net, since scoring a goal against Barbados would give them 3-2, and they would win the match, and scoring in their own goal would make it 3-2 to Barbados, so they would lose the match, but win the qualification, and Barbados were defending both point. Amazingly, Barbados did actually manage to do so, successfully defending themselves, while half of their team were defending Grenada's goal against Grenada, and then scored the golden goal in extra time and qualified. Worked for a warehouse 4 days a week, 11 AM 9:30 PM Monday to Thursday. They reiterated many times during the interview process that overtime was optional. My first day my supervisor told me that overtime is indeed optional, but if you don't stay for overtime then everybody else has to stay even later. So if you do leave on time, don't come back. Whatever. I didn't mind the extra hours too much, although a 10.5-hour shift is already long, but the bonus was that we could go early if all the orders were done. As you can imagine, the good workers busted their ass from start to finish, cutting as many corners, good and bad ones, as they could, in order to get out early. Normally this ended up with us being able to leave around 15 minutes early, or on a really good day where the stars aligned, everybody showed up, we could leave as early as 7:30 or 8. However, leaving that early only happened once, or twice a year at most. Point overtime was every week. Every single Monday we would work until 2 AM 11 AM 2 AM isn't ideal when you have no idea when you're off. At around 7 PM we'd start to get an idea if we are in for another hour or another 6. One of the genius new hires mentioned to the boss in the office how he was hoping to get out by 6. Oh good. Apparently the boss was thinking us leaving early was a common occurrence now and decided that nobody was going to be leaving early anymore. Sweep or dust, or whatever, but nobody leaves until 9:30. All of a sudden we were late every single day without fail. Why? We were working hours off to get out early, but failing every day, and ending up on time, or still late. By taking away our ability to leave early, everybody gave up working hard. Slow down. We've got another hour left anyways. I'm not sweeping. Went from about 45 hours a week to 55, 13 hours every day. Nobody ever left early anymore, but nobody left on time either. Losses for everybody involved, because the boss didn't realize that us leaving early for 2 days out of a year actually gave us the daily motivation to work hours off the other 360. TLDR boss put a stop to leaving early. No incentive to work hours off anymore means paying overtime every day. I worked at a call center, and whenever someone called customer attention to cancel their service you would lose a point. If you could not talk them out of it, the people with the least points got more hours. So whenever people called with a legit excuse, like I'm moving, the phone agents would hassle the caller to try and make them stay or give them the runaround, so they would get frustrated and just give up. Once I was on the phone with a lady and she wanted to cancel her service. I asked her why, and she said it was for my mother, and she has died. I gave her absolutely no pressure to stay or change her mind. She sounded like she was having a hard enough time as it is. After the call ended, I got a message from a supervisor that had been listening to my call. They randomly listen to our calls from time to time. And he wanted to know why I did not try and get her to stay with them. I said the service was not for her, it was for her mother, and she died. His response was the most heartless thing I have ever heard. You should have made her send us proof of death. That can take over a month to do, and that's another bill for us. Or try to convince her to keep the service in memory of her mother. It's all about delaying the customer until after their next bill. After my shift was over, I gave them my 2 weeks notice. And as a final dick move, they changed my schedule for both weeks. I told my boss I had made a mistake, took back my letter saying I would still come in for the next 2 weeks, and left and never came back. Edit: their system actually requires no proof or actual reason to stop a customer service. It even says in their contract that they can stop service at any time. They were only doing this to be a dick and charge the customer more money. Edit: this took place in Canada. Edit 3: this took place at a call center that outsources calls to over 200 businesses in the United States. Strip joints in Alberta, Canada are an interesting example of this, believing that strippers and strip clubs were the root of all things wrong with the world. The Citizens for Decency, led by Audrey Jensen, sprung about in Alberta in the 1980s. They pushed for legislation that would create an invisible, imaginary buffer zone of 1.5 meters or something around exotic dancers to protect them from patrons in Pervs Row. This barrier would become facilitated in some clubs with an odd little railing or other physical means, but most bars I've seen in Alberta don't have actual physical barriers. At least not anymore. Maybe there were more intrusive blocks and partitions when the law was new. The result of this protective measure was instantly that patrons can no longer hand $5 bills, 20s, etc. to the dancers. They cannot tuck a bill into their undies or crawl on stage with a bill in their mouth to have it snatched away. Instead, in Alberta, strip club patrons throw dollar coins at the dancers. Typically this comes after their dance, when the dancers go around posing on their knees, etc. with their personal posters rolled up to improvise a cone. Customers throw their loonies at the cone, and then it's funneled toward her bussy. Other versions of this is the dancers will lick a loony and stick it to theirs, and the game is to throw your loonies to try to knock it off. Winners get a fridge magnet, signed poster, keychain, etc. Once the coin toss games are over, the dancer will then return to the stage with a large magnet on a leash and drag it around, collecting her hard-earned metal. She'll intermittently scrape the loonies into a beer jug as they accumulate and continue dragging the magnet around. I should say that some folks still prefer to keep it classy and use larger bills, but it's about 1 in 20. So, to recap, the goal was to protect the safety and dignity of dancers. The result is that dancers have become reduced to flashy coin toss targets. TLDR, in Alberta, strip clubs are weird, and you throw dollar coins at the strippers. Edit: wow, my first gilding. Thanks, kind stranger. The beach club I worked as a cabana boy at decided one summer to buy $40,000 worth of club umbrellas. The old system was that you as a cabana boy had 30 to 60 families who you took care of in exchange for tips. One of your responsibilities was to carry whatever heavy beach equipment they bought, Tommy Bahama chairs and umbrellas, from the cabana to the ocean and set it up, and then carry it back up to the cabana at the end of the day. If you left chairs or umbrellas on the beach, the club supervisors would charge you $1 per item, because they would have to carry it to avoid the stuff from getting washed away, broken or stolen by locals. It was a pretty fair and workable system. The new system was that members still had their own chairs, but would request a number of umbrellas from the cabana boy. Obviously, they requested way more than they would ever need all by themselves, and the club umbrellas were extra heavy and exhausting to set up. We complained to management about this, and a lot of other stuff, but they basically just said fuck you to us. Well, That didn't exactly inspire us to do them any favors, considering most of our pay came from the members. Since all the umbrellas looked the same, we would just take the chairs and leave the umbrellas on the beach and no one would know who was supposed to be responsible for picking them up. The supervisor simply couldn't get them all, and almost all of them wound up broken or missing by the end of the summer. Whoops TLDR. Beach Club got new equipment that caused a lot of extra work without giving us any additional compensation or tools to deal with the work. All the new equipment ended up getting trashed. When I was in middle school, a girl in my class fell down the stairs and broke her arm. She was one of those girls who was always somehow sick or hurt, so I didn't believe her, but most of the administration freaked the fuck out about it. Their theory was that the fall was due to too much aggression in the hallways and on the stairs. There were probably 150 kids in my middle school and only 2 sets of stairs. We were all in the second floor of one building. It was very crowded. As soon as the bell rang, everyone would run out and flood the hallways and try to push and shove their way to their next class as violently as they had to. It was Catholic school, so we were penalized if we were late, and they were pretty strict about it. Anyway, for some reason they actually thought that if they put a red piece of tape down the length of the hallway, everything would be fixed. They designated one set of stairs for going up and the other for going down. One side of the line went one way, the other went the opposite way, like it was a road and we were cars. If your classroom was 4 steps away or directly across the hall, you couldn't just walk to it. You had to go all the way around the line, with all 149 of the other middle schoolers trying to push and shove their way in front of you or around you. We weren't even allowed to step on the line. We could get written up for that. They called that getting an infraction. It was the same penalty if we were late to class. Obviously, this backfired pretty severely. Not only did TARDIS skyrocket, I'm pretty sure there were more injuries as we frantically pushed at each other. The line was mercilessly ridiculed. People would push their friends onto it, so they would get in trouble for touching it, or push them across the hall, so they were forced to circle the perimeter again to get to class. Eventually, the boys started riots, or protests where they'd gather in the hallways and push through in a straight line, forcing traffic to all go one direction, line or no. One day, we had a planned protests and started running zigzags over the line and up the downstairs and down the upstairs. We got in trouble of course, and some kids got hurt, but participating in that was a lot of fun. That was right before spring break, and when we came back, the line was gone. I guess they finally realized that it was a bad and potentially dangerous idea. I was in high school in the 1990s and early 2000s and short shorts were fairly popular at the time for the girls. It seemed like an arms race to see who could wear them the shortest without getting in trouble. When I started the rule was vague and hard to define. Basically must be longer than the cheerleader skirts but those were really short and how do you compare that accurately to what someone has on? So some genius thought, fingertip length. When standing up the shorts must be at least as long as your middle finger as you held your hands by your side point. A little side note, early on in high school one of the teachers got a little too handsy with a student and got in massive trouble. His hand was on her lower back while talking to her despite her trying to get away. After this, teachers refrained from touching students unless it was a hug the student initiated. So girls would get called out, hold their hands at their sides, but they learned that if they didn't have their arms firmly against their body and not quite straight they could easily have their hands an inch or more higher on their legs. And since teachers didn't want to touch the girls they couldn't ensure arms were straight. Also some people just have short arms, and no matter what they could wear some really short shorts/skirts as a result. For a few years shorts and skirts actually got shorter than they were before the rule was implemented. By junior year they settled on shorts/skirts must be at least 5 inches from the middle of the kneecap. Of course this wasn't fair, because 5 inches on a 5-foot flat girl looked really different than 5 inches on a 6-foot tall girl, but at least the staff could claim they were using the same metric across the board. I visited a teacher after school hours when I was in college because I had a physics question, and I'll just say it appears they had given up entirely because the shorts I saw then were far shorter than anything that existed when I went to school there. The Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burros Act. Congress implemented this federal law as a means to protect the wild horse population, because wild horses represent the free spirit of the West Point. As it turns out, horses are exotic to our current ecosystem. Horses existed here 13,000 years ago, but were wiped out, and the North American ecosystems have changed to make do without them. They weren't reintroduced until the Spanish expeditions in the 1600s, where a few horses managed to escape captivity. They are also highly invasive. They damage every ecosystem that they are a part of and utterly kill biodiversity. They also reproduce at a rate of 20% annually, which is huge for a species whose mares can only produce one offspring per breeding season. This high rate of reproduction is mainly due to a lack of natural predation. I mean, within 6 years of passing the Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burros Act, horse populations tripled, and they continue to grow. Since they are protected, we can't really do anything with them. We can't kill them, and we can't sell them to be killed, so to control the population, BLM basically rounds up the excess and ships them to facilities where they are cared for until they die. This process costs us millions every year. BLM's budget for 2018 set aside $70 million just for horses, and that doesn't include the cost of these horse care facilities. On a side note, it's kinda funny actually, because President Trump proposed that we sell these horses to countries that would be able to eat them or use them in some way, since we can't, as a means of cutting back on costs associated with horse care and even subsidize our capture efforts a bit. Well, of course the headlines then read Trump wants to mass slaughter the wild horses or something along those lines, which naturally drives public opinion against the idea, even though it seems like a fairly common sense thing to do. To be fair though, in order for that proposal to be legal, we'd have to abolish this act, which I'm perfectly okay with. In 8th grade, we had a computer class with a teacher who was pretty rude. My friend and I did not take well to his demeanor, and he was a new teacher as well. It wasn't long after our first week of school we figured out he was a real dick. My friend is a homosexual and this teacher would give him a hard time, so guess what? We gave this for a year to remember from taping the laser under his computer mouse before class, so he'd spend 10 minutes looking to make sure the connection was right, to spit wads, to making drawings and jokes about him, because that's 8th grade us were doing retaliation. One day he decided to revoke our internet privileges on our specified computers, and we were in charge of the school web page. Then he'd lower our grade, since we weren't allowed access to our schoolwork. What did this do? Give us more time to think of revenge plots. This included putting on our clunky school earphones with them not connected, so he'd scream at us no music, then we'd hold up the unconnected end of the plug and smile. He eventually got so fed up with us, he'd send us out to the hall every single day during class, so he wouldn't have to deal with us. But he sent us out in chairs that have wheels. So every day from that point on, instead of having a computer class, we had a race down the hallway in rolling chairs class. It was hilarious. By this point, multiple kids were purposely getting sent out of class every day to join the rally chair races. It was a year full of wins, losses, triumph. The teacher didn't even give enough shit to stop us. He would literally watch us flying and spinning down the hallways at top speed through his classroom window. He would just shake his head, probably pondering his own existence at this point, hoping maybe one or all of us would fall to our own demise. Every single rule this teacher implemented completely backfired. Needless to say, he wasn't a teacher for very long. 3 years ago, while working at a large resort in Co., our GM decided to stop hiring the outside company we used for Christmas decorations, and instead made all of us managers sign up for multiple 2-hour blocks to decorate, since most of our decorations we owned in-house. Well, we were a lodge-style resort with rafters all over. This meant fluffing and decorating multiple trees for our 30,000 square feet of meeting space, and hanging the icicle lights with a staple gun on every stupid bullshit rafter. Nobody wanted to do this, not even the engineering crew. We all had so much to do in this period, like preparing for banquets and holiday parties each night, sales coordinating these, front desk crazy busy, etc. So we all decorated. Nobody said how well it needed to look. The front desk manager staple gunned his thumb, had to be out, took twice the time to check people in when he was on desk. The sales department decorated trees on only the facing sides, and awfully I might add. So sparse on ornaments it looked like a tree decorated in a halfway house. People found these old Peanuts Christmas decorations from probably 20 years ago in the basement that were unanimously decided to be placed all over for Diamond Resort with Snoopy and Charlie Brown all over, haha. The one thing I did that was cool was I made a wine rack advent calendar. I told them I gifted a cheap bottle of wine each night to a random guest who had a pretty high check, but I tried it once, and the guest was weirded out and thought I was faking with them, so I just gave them out to my friends at home. Point needless to say, GM was furious and couldn't discipline everyone, so we hired the company back and everyone gloomily went back to their normal jobs. This is probably best intended for r/malicious compliance, but hope I wasn't too late to the thread for people to enjoy this anecdote. Several years back I managed a group of 6 people, 2 of whom were women. Coincidentally, they both ended up pregnant at the same time point. When the day comes, and they both leave on 20 weeks of maternity leave, I find out that not only do I have to hold their jobs for them, but I can't have any even temporary replacements, because as far as the company was concerned, I was fully staffed. We were just expected to suck up the work 1/3 of the team was no longer doing. When annual review time came around, I was told my team was underperforming. The fact that we were understaffed by 1/3 was understood, but the review system didn't allow that to be taken into consideration, so we all got faked on raises and bonuses. The best part is I found out that women on maternity leave automatically got 5 out of 5 performance reviews, because it wouldn't be fair to rate them while they're on leave, so the women not working got significantly better bonuses than the men who were doing their work for them. At the end of the 2 girls' leave, one just said I'm not coming back. She'd just wanted to stretch out her benefits coverage as long as possible. The other one did come back to work and announced that she was already pregnant again, which I didn't even think was possible. So a few months later we were saying goodbye to her again for another 20 weeks. The guys who had to pick up the slack very much resented the whole situation and took quit for other jobs over it. At one point the team was down to 2 people, the rest having quit or on leave. One of my previous jobs, a co-worker told me a story about how he trusted the wrong fetched when he was way out in the sticks and about 100 miles from his house delivering office products. There were no drivers in the area to relieve him. So he stopped at a gas station bathroom and tried to clean up as best he could. His boxes were a total loss, of course, but he had still gotten enough on his pants for the smell to be obvious within conversational range. But he still had a full van route to run. So instead of entering the customer business, saying hi, and getting a signature, he decided to just slide the product as far into the lobby as he could from the front door, say hey, how y'all doing? Y'all have a good one, and then signed the proof of delivery as left at door. For 35 customers, so of course, a few of those customers called in on him asking what the hell was going on. Some of those calls made it to the owner of the business. So the owner called the driver and asked the driver to explain himself, which the driver did, in full. He asked the driver if he had called in the issue to dispatch, and the driver had, adding that dispatch had signed off on his plan. So, after he got off the call with the driver, he walked to the dispatch office and asked the dispatcher if the driver had called in his dilemma. The dispatcher confirmed that the driver had indeed called it in, and that they authorized him to leave the orders at the customer's doors. Naturally, this made the owner mad, at which point he yelled, "Red-faced new rule, if a driver sheets his pants, he goes home. I don't care where he is, or what's left of his route. We can't have drivers going around smelling like shit. It's bad for business." Fast forward 3 months. Our shippers' trucks are late. I had just gotten back from a very early route. I had to help put out fires all over the warehouse due to the late trucks, and then get drivers loaded and out the door. Before I had to load up and run a second route of my own, because another driver had called out that morning. It was shaping up to be a horrible day at an already horrible job, and I wanted no part of it. So instead of running around like an underpaid chicken with my head cut off, I simply recalled what my coworker told me about rule #1 regarding number 2 and sheet my pants in front of the dispatcher. He had to send me home because it was in the rules, and I got a free day off. A large group of women and religious zealots started the temperance movement, hoping it would make better men out of our fellow male Americans. Alcohol abuse became a big problem of the late 19th and nascent 20th centuries, so it isn't like this movement was tiny. It involved the Methodists, the Baptists, Mormons, the temperance movement, the women's suffrage movement, and all of the other fun-loving groups who pop up every 30 months or so to rob us of yet another fun way to have fun. In the upswell of passing the Universal Suffrage Amendment, 19, a second amendment became law as well, 18. The 18th Amendment passed swiftly and no one pondered the ramifications. Women thought they had won both suffrage and a less drunk society. Men thought they had just made a big step forward into a more sober and happy world. Within 2 years, mobsters in Chicago and New York City had set up an illicit and complex alcohol manufacturing and distribution network. You would have never heard of the name Al Capone if it had not been for the 18th Amendment. Speakeasies rose up across the country, and in most small towns, the prohibition laws were ignored. Moonshine and homemade beer was plentiful everywhere but in the big cities. And even in the big cities, beer was like weed is today. You could obtain it, but it would cost you. Speaking of weed, it is these same groups along with William Randolph Hearst who had banned marijuana just a decade earlier. They love having fun, don't they? Anyways, after 10 years of a massive crime wave sweeping the country followed by a massive economic downturn, FDR campaigned on repealing prohibition. He won in a landslide. The 21st Amendment repeals prohibition. However, due to a long period of beer and liquor being off the market, Americans' tastes had changed. Homemade beer was watered down to spread it out to more people, or over a longer period of time. Same for liquor, so beer that was made afterwards was less strong and less flavorful. If you ever want to blame anyone for the sorry taste of American beer such as Bud Light, etc., look no further than the temperance movement and their menagerie of fun-loving, church-going compatriots. Massachusetts State Assembly pushed a law stripping the governor of the power to appoint a US senator, which later caused the Democrats in the US Senate to lose the supermajority in early 2010, thus changing the political landscape, and Obamacare was formed. In 2004, then Senator John Kerry had the potential to be president, which meant that his seat could have been vacant. With Governor Mitt Romney, that would have meant he could appoint a senator to fill the seat for the remainder of the term. Most likely, he would have chosen a fellow Republican to fill the vacancy. The Senate Assembly then chose to change law, stripping the governor the power to choose a senator and leaving it in the hands of the people through a special election. The presidential election resulted in John Kerry losing to George W. Bush, and that was the end of it, or so we thought. In August 2009, Senator Ted Kennedy died of glioblastoma, a type of brain cancer, leaving his Senate seat vacant. Since there were new laws regarding how senators are appointed, MA had to follow through with having a special election to appoint a new senator. At that time, Obamacare was being formed and pushed through the House and held the supermajority at exactly 60 votes by the Democrats. Without it, the Republicans can filibuster a bill to death. The state assembly passed a law allowing the new governor, Devil Patrick, to appoint an interim senator until special elections have concluded. He chose a Democrat, Paul Kirk. This meant that the Senate had until the end year to pass the Affordable Care Act. They had to rush it, pushing through a draft that could have been better. In December in 2010, the special elections were conducted in January, and Scott Brown, Republican, had an upset win, thus ending the supermajority that the Democrats in Senate enjoyed. At time, any living and breathing Democrat was basically expected to win the Senate seat. Attorney General of MA Martha Coakley won the primaries and decided to sit on her win. Meanwhile, Scott Brown worked furiously to earn his votes and started to climb the polls, while his opponent wasn't anywhere nearly as much to be seen campaigning. At one point, Coakley answered a question of her what she should be doing to combat her sliding popularity in the contest with a rhetorical question, as opposed to standing outside Fenway Park in the cold, shaking hands with voters. This referenced the actions of Scott Brown. On top of that, she called Kurt bloody sock, shilling a Yankee fan. That was a big no-no. In the end, she lost. Scott Brown won, thus ending the supermajority that the Democrats enjoyed in the Senate. Many years ago I worked for a gaming company that was an offshoot from a southwestern development company. There were a lot of differences between these two wings, including age. We were a young lot, 20s, and the others were in their 30s. While they had a lot of experience dealing with correctness and maintainability of software, we were more concerned with prove/disprove an idea, coolness, and fun factor. Some genius manager somewhere decided that the gaming group had to learn from the other group without taking into account the fact that we throw away 90% of what we create because most of it was not fun points and changes that happened overnight. Massive test case repo. Since automation was not happening in the graphics driver, we had to do manual tests for non-unit tests, blocking non-relevant websites like /.org and gamasutra.com because it sounded too similar to such yoga code reviews by the software group. Imagine writing shader code in assembly and having it reviewed by Java programmers. Visual Source safe for source code control and content control. There was Scrum thrown around, though I didn't know what they were on about. They gave up pretty quickly on this. To be fair, there were other things they implemented, like some design patterns, code branching strategy, that greatly helped me, personally, but we'll not talk about the broken clock also being right twice a day. This lead to slowed pace of output. It is an idea that needs to be proven. I have to write these test cases, only to have the code thrown out, because of the fun factor. This taught me to deduce now you have two products to maintain. Your product and the test cases better be worth the cost. Now I use the sophisticated phrase cost of quality. Ugh, my interest in SSH and SSH proxies and ENS mirroring, along with discovering things like /etc/hosts. All courtesy of the articles I had read on, you guessed it, /.org, how to do checkbox oriented code reviews and miss the intent of code reviews. Java programmers loving their life when comparing their beans to DirectX and com/com plus win32. Also them pitying us C++ programmers for memory leaks, art assets, binary in nature, randomly getting corrupted. VSS was fine for code, but for binaries, needless to say, this left a bad taste in our mouth about anything they brought to us. Took me a couple of good mentors to unlearn and relearn better practices. In my opinion, knowledge hurt us. There was no one wise enough to start with the problem and then think about the solutions. My high school went crazy a couple of years ago with its rules because the principal had a genuine dictatorship problem. First, a no-touch rule was implemented, which I guess is fair enough to stop kids either fighting or showing gross PDA, but it also involved kids getting detention for hugging each other when they saw each other after summer. Then the girls got a uniform change. Catholic school, strict uniform. He tried to make it so every girl had to tie their hair up every day. During sports class and science we could totally understand because of health and safety, but 24/7 hair tied up was a faking joke. Around the same time, principal made a rule saying that kids couldn't hang around in groups larger than 4 at break times. And that's when everything backfired. Literally 5 kids standing chatting would be broken up because apparently it promoted gang culture. These kids just wanted to talk to their friends. Needless to say, pretty much every parent came in with huge complaints. Newspapers were reporting on it. People who didn't even go to the school but lived in the area were up in arms, and those last 2 rules were very quickly changed in under a week. The Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burros Act. Congress implemented this federal law as a means to protect the wild horse population, because wild horses represent the free spirit of the West Point. As it turns out, horses are exotic to our current ecosystem. Horses existed here 13,000 years ago, but were wiped out, and the North American ecosystems have changed to make do without them. They weren't reintroduced until the Spanish expeditions in the 1600s, where a few horses managed to escape captivity. They are also highly invasive. They damage every ecosystem that they are a part of and utterly kill biodiversity. They also reproduce at a rate of 20% annually, which is huge for a species whose mares can only produce 1 offspring per breeding season. This high rate of reproduction is mainly due to a lack of natural predation. I mean, within 6 years of passing the Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burros Act, horse populations tripled, and they continue to grow. Since they are protected, we can't really do anything with them. We can't kill them, and we can't sell them to be killed, so to control the population BLM basically rounds up the excess and ships them to facilities where they are cared for until they die. This process costs us millions every year. BLM's budget for 2018 set aside $70 million just for horses, and that doesn't include the cost of these horse care facilities. On a side note, it's kinda funny actually, because President Trump proposed that we sell these horses to countries that would be able to eat them or use them in some way, since we can't, as a means of cutting back on costs associated with horse care and even subsidize our capture efforts a bit. Well, of course the headlines then read Trump wants to mass slaughter the wild horses or something along those lines, which naturally drives public opinion against the idea, even though it seems like a fairly common sense thing to do. To be fair though, in order for that proposal to be legal, we'd have to abolish this act, which I'm perfectly okay with.